Today, we patch SQL clusters with Tanium Automate. Welcome back to Tanium Tech Talks. I'm your host, Ashley McGlone. SQL. Structured query language brings back memories for me. But even in the days of cloud and software as a service, those on-prem database servers are still mission critical, and that's why we need to keep them patched. But that means downtime and disruption. So after a patching weekend, how can we make sure those servers don't wake up with a hangover and forget where they are, right? Well, back in 2023, Tanium announced a wave of innovation called Autonomous Endpoint Management, AEM, and one of the cornerstone components is called Automate. And you voted with your clicks. That's one of our most popular videos here on the Tanium channel right now. And what we're hearing from customers is that they love it. So today we're going to see how Automate can help us with SQL Server cluster patching. And of course, we've got a demo queued up. So back on the show today is my mate, Rob. Please introduce yourself for our audience.
Thanks for having me back. My name's Rob. I'm one of our customer org members based out of the UK. I now work in our domain architecture team, working alongside our endpoint management team, looking at how we can help customers implement our endpoint management range of products. And one of the asks that was coming up was, how can we patch our clusters? And we looked at it and said, well, Automate would be great at this alongside patch and sensors and packages. So we put together some example content and we thought we'd share that with you.
Well, that sounds great, Rob. Welcome back. And, right before we hit record, I looked this up on Wikipedia. There's actually a Wikipedia entry for video game combo moves. I didn't realize this, but so ready for this? All right. This is how Wikipedia defines a video game combo move. It says it's a set of actions performed in sequence, usually with strict timing limitations that yield a significant benefit or advantage. Now that sounds like Tanium Automate to me. So
I've got a mash of Street Fighter and Automate in my head now.
Yep.
What combination of 6 buttons have I got to press?
Well, that's kind of where we are today, isn't it? I mean, we're patching a SQL cluster. There's some nuances to that. Why don't you just kind of read us in here? What are the nuances in this combo move?
We're focusing on SQL clusters today, but this kind of goes way beyond this. It could be any sort of cluster or group of devices where you need to orchestrate, say, some patching as we're going to do, or other actions across those different nodes in a controlled manner. And say SQL cluster patching was the common one. And every customer, and I was saying this to Ashley earlier before we hit record, every customer and environment are going to have unique requirements around this. So this isn't perhaps like some of the other videos we've done, like I know Provision or MDE, where it's fairly prescriptive as to this is like best practice how you should do it. In your environment, you are probably going to have requirements and things that must be done in a particular way. What we're just trying to show you is how you could use Automate and patch and various other things within Tanium to achieve that. Typically, for patching a cluster, you would want to validate that the node you are patching is no longer active. Services are healthy on another node. You might need to move services around, and you want to make sure that you're not going to disrupt services any more than you absolutely have to. Obviously, if you're doing a failover, there's going to be a brief blip, but the last thing in the world you want to do is go and start patching a member of the cluster that's currently active with services, for example. So what we've done is built some really simple content that will allow you to look at the state of a SQL availability group and manipulate it, so move it around. In your environment, you might need to control services on other servers or on the endpoint itself, that kind of thing, which is all absolutely possible because ultimately we've got Automate there, so we can put additional steps and checks in there as we need.
So what I hear you saying is we're going to dump out the bucket of Legos and show you one way you can build a spaceship, but your spaceship's going to look a little bit different than ours because you've got different things in your environment to account for.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So why don't you take us in and show us how do we get started with this?
Yeah. So there are some SQL functions, so sensors and packages within Tanium, but they weren't the ones that we needed to do this. So I guess to start with, and there is an article being published that goes alongside this where we've shared the content, but this isn't out the box. You are going to need to put this together, and we would, as with any content like this that isn't part of the full product, we'd urge you to read it, understand it, make sure it's appropriate in your environment. Please don't test it in production. That always leads to more excitement than we like.
Quick commercial here. So you said, just I want to make sure people heard that right. We're going to look at some sensors and packages that are not built in. And if you're not aware, Tanium has a number of training courses, and this one happens to be free. There's one called Advanced Content for Tanium, where you need to complete that so that you can then in your cloud subscription be enabled to create your own custom sensors and packages.
Absolutely. And I was at our Conversion New York event actually last week, and we ran a lab on custom content. And if you're able to get to any of the other Converge events or as we go around the world and run them, that session for 90 minutes is really good on some of the tips and tricks. Things to do, things definitely not to do when you're writing content. So yeah, the course absolutely get to it. And if you can get anywhere near a Converge as well, that's good as well. Let's look at the sensor first. And what we needed to be able to do with the sensor was understand for a given endpoint what the state of our SQL availability group on that endpoint is. So are we active? Are we passive? Are we healthy? That kind of thing. So we've got this sensor that I wrote called SQL availability group replica status. Bit of a mouthful, and it takes a few parameters. So the first parameter is the availability group name. So if you're not familiar with SQL availability groups, this is effectively our cluster name. I've probably done it a massive disservice, but that's how I think of it. So it's a logical construct. Then we've got our instance name. So if you've ever worked with SQL Server, you can have multiple instances of SQL on the same endpoint. In this case, this is the default one. This was very much a next install in my NAB when I set this up. And then finally, we're entering the computer name. And the reason we're doing this is as part of the Automate playbook, we want to be really precise about the data we're getting back. So we're positively validating that it really is what we think it is. So I'm interested in the SQL replica status for this availability group on this server. And I've got two in here. I've got SQL 1 and SQL 2. Again, I was being very imaginative. And then finally, we've got this filter to only return data for this particular endpoint. This just enables the results to be a bit cleaner and a bit simpler for us to manage when we get into Automate. So I'm just going to ask this and we'll see the data we get back. And we can see here that we've got two results. So we've got SQL 1 is currently the primary node in our availability group. And in terms of health, it's good. So we're connected to the cluster. We've not become islanded or isolated, anything like that. And we're synchronized. Data's healthy. Now, there may be other things that you need to check, which is what we were saying earlier. But for my example, I can see I'm healthy. And then likewise, SQL 2, we can see that that is currently the secondary role. It is also connected. It is also synchronized. So that gives us some information about our cluster, and we can see that we're in a good state. So that lets us see things. The other thing we need is a mechanism to be able to move the availability group around. So effectively switching the roles primary to secondary. And for this in Tanium would be a package. I have seen, and I'm sure Ashley has seen this as well, where some people write sensors that take action, and is something that we would strongly discourage you from doing. Please don't do that. We have packages to do that. And a package, in this case, I've written it in PowerShell because we're using the SQL PowerShell module. So it makes it really easy for us. You can write this stuff in whatever suits you. So if you're using this to manage a Linux cluster of some description, so Python or shell script might be more appropriate. Again, you've got those options available to you. So I'm just going to find our package.
So to recap a little bit, what you're saying here is this could be Windows or Linux.
Yep.
It's up to you to kind of write the special sauce that talks to the cluster and checks the status, so you know you're proceeding in the right direction and making sure the right people are online and in the right status.
Exactly. But it is quite straightforward. And we'll have a look at the package, and then we can go back and have a look at how the sensor's written. Because if you've done a bit of PowerShell perhaps in the past, but you're not familiar with SQL, actually, it's really quite straightforward. If you use the PowerShell module that Microsoft provide, kind of cuts out so much of the legwork. It's all done for you. But
So it sounds like that's a prerequisite then. Does the
yes,
package download the module, or is the module
it
already
doesn't.
installed on the SQL
We
servers?
we assume it's already on the server, and
Okay.
the article that goes alongside this has all that in lots of detail as to stuff you need to make this example work. So the package itself, and if you never looked at these in detail, we'll just talk about it really quickly. So we're using a thing called T PowerShell, which is the way that if you're using a PowerShell script within a package in Tanium is how you should launch it. So it handles things like 32 versus 64-bit execution, other lots of interesting stuff that the custom content course will go into. We're going to bypass execution policy for this because we don't know what is necessarily set on the endpoint, so we need to be able to run this. And then we are running our SQL AG switchover.ps1 script, which is attached. And we've got two arguments that we're going to pass in. And some of these arguments we'll have already seen from the sensor. So what's the availability group name? So that's SQL AG in this case. And what's the instance name? So if I was to do this in PowerShell at the command line, these are the same arguments I would put in. And we'll just download this and I will show you what it looks like quickly. So in the script, we've got two parameters that we saw within the package definition. So we've got the availability group name and the instance name. We need to import SQL PowerShell module. This is a little bit rough and ready. We should have tries and catches in here and so on, but I try to keep the example as easy to digest as possible. The next piece here, again, something that we covered on the course at Converge, and the custom content course will cover it as well. When you pass a package parameter in from Tanium, it gets base 64 encoded, and we need to unencode that to be able to work with it. Really straightforward to do. We just call this unescaped data string method within PowerShell, and it converts it. And then these two lines here of what do the work, really straightforward. So the first line, we just create a string that has the path to the availability group that we want to manipulate. So we've got the SQL Server drive, as it's referred to, and then we're going to have the computer name, which is just the machine we're running on. So we're getting that from the environment variable, the instance name, which is passed in as a parameter, availability groups, and then the availability group name, which also came in as a parameter. And then all we do is call switch SQL availability group with that path. Very, very, very simple. Again, doing this in production, put lots more guardrails around it, please. Lots of things that I'm sure people watching the video would do to make this more robust, but just the simplest example we could come up with to make it easy to consume. So,
And tell me again, what does that commandlet do? Switch availability
so
group.
this is built-in one from Microsoft that allows you to move a SQL availability group from one node to another, basically. And there are lots of other parameters you can put in there. So you might want to have more control over how it fails over, loss settings, that kind of thing. When this runs, you run this against the device that you want to switch over to. So there is no parameter that we've passed in saying you should put it here. That commandlet, when you run it, if you don't tell it where you want it to move to, it assumes you want you to move the availability group to the device that you've run it on. So we would run this on SQL 2 to make that the active node.
As I was kind of thinking through this, that I was implying that in my mind. I'm glad you called that out. So that's going to be targeted to the computer that we want to move primary. Got it.
Exactly. Again, you can make this far more complex and do far more things with it. And you would almost certainly want to put more guardrails in here than I have done. But as a really simple art of the possible example, hopefully this gives something people enough that they can build on and do more with.
Yeah, this show is an advanced show. This is not for your intro to Tanium. This is,
Yeah, this is one of our
yeah,
more complicated ones, isn't it?
yeah. It takes some memory to remember which six buttons to mash in a row to get that special combo move. Yeah.
Yes. So we had a look at the package. Should we go and have a quick look at the sensor as well? And again, that's really quite straightforward. Okay, so we're in the sensors. There are actually a few in here. We only document the one. The other three are me fiddling with things when I was building this out, looking at what the best ways to do it were. So SQL availability group replica status few things in here. If you're familiar with sensors, you'll already know this, but we've got our max sensor age. What this allows us to do is say, if I've already run this sensor and then I execute it again within this period, so 15 minutes in this case, the endpoint will just return the same data. It won't re-execute it. So we're being kinder to the endpoint. It avoids denial of service type problems that you might have. If you've got particularly heavy sensor, that can be quite useful. Equally, if it's a heavy sensor, maybe it's better as a sensor package anyway. But in this case, actually, when we come to use this in the playbook, we will override this, and we'll talk about why when we get there. The max string age. So when data comes back from endpoints into the Tanium platform and is shown to you in Interact, or we send it out with Connect or to ServiceNow, whatever we choose to do with it, it comes back from the endpoint as a hash, and then it's converted. We store the hash to text conversion on the server. We do want to get rid of that once it's no longer needed. In this case, I've set that to a week. This type of thing is discussed on the content creation course. It's really about understanding how often your sensor is going to be used and how often the data might change as to what's appropriate. This sensor isn't returning lots of very unique data anyway, so it's not that much of a concern. But you should always set this and just have it set to a reasonable value to allow housekeeping to take place. We've then got our columns that make up the sensor. So when data comes back from the sensor, it's actually sent as one big long string, and then the Tanium server understands what that looks like and breaks it up. So we said, in this case, the pipe symbol is the delimiter between our different columns, and these are what the columns are. The delimiter, you obviously want to pick something that is not going to be part of your string of data that's going to come back, because that can cause it to get broken up in a way that you don't intend it to be. So we probably wouldn't use a comma or a dash, for example. You can use multiple characters in here if you need to. Coming down, we've got the parameters that we specified. So we've got the availability group name, the instance name, computer name, and whether it's only this server or not. As you can see here, 3 of these are free text fields, and one of them is a checkbox. And if I just come up here and put this in edit mode, we can come and have a little bit more detail. So we can see here, we can configure whether these are input parameters, checkboxes, that kind of thing. We can add more. We can put constrained lists in. So perhaps you're going to build this and have just a predefined list of things for your operators to use. You can do that. You can use regex to put validation in as well to make sure people have done what you're expecting them to do. So I haven't done any of this for this, trying to keep it simple. But you have got lots of options here. Again, custom content training will cover that for you. Coming down to the sensor itself, again, if you've not looked at these, we've got various different languages available. VB scripts obviously going away. We've got things like WMI, you can do PowerShell, Python, Bez, and so on. We're using PowerShell in this case. So just to walk through what we're doing at the top, we are bringing in our variables, or the arguments that are passed into the sensor when it's executed, and we're just storing these as PowerShell objects in the usual way. We're validating that we are running on this computer. So we can't ask SQL question to another device with this. You've got to run it on this machine. So we're saying, okay, the computer name that you've passed in, is it this computer? Because if it isn't, then we're just not going to do anything. And you'll see there is no else to the if. We just skip on and we don't do it. So check that we're running where we should be. Bring in our SQL PowerShell module, and then very much like the package that we were just looking at that managed the switchover, we set the path using those parameters that were passed in again. And then we use the getChildItem PowerShell command. Let's go and find out the state of play. So when you run this command, you get a whole bunch of information back about the availability group replica status. And then all we are doing is doing another check. So if the only this server option is set, which is this checkbox here, we will only return data if the computer name that's returned is our one. So you can get information about other members of the availability group with this command. So you can filter it down to be only this machine. If we're doing that and the computer name is this device, then we then return the name of the availability group, what the current role is, the connection state, and the synchronization state. And you can see here, we've just got this line variable, and we can pick out the different parameters from that as we go through. And then we simply send the data out with write host. Again, content creation course, tell you all about that. So really straightforward. There's a little bit more going on here, but the key things are these 2 lines where we construct the path to the availability group replica status. We go and get that data. We filter through it, iterate through it, make sure it is what we're looking for, and then we break it up into that pipe separated string and then send it out with right host. So really straightforward, nothing hard going on. Again, like the package, there's no guardrails in here to speak of. There's a little bit going on here, but things like, we should check that the SQL PowerShell module actually exists before we try and import it, that kind of thing. But again, trying to keep this simple and easy to digest.
I really appreciate this. It really is just a few simple lines of PowerShell, and that's the
Yeah,
beauty of the Tanium platform. I mean, goes back to Tanium 101. It's an extensible platform where you can take the code and put it in there to the OS that and make some really cool things happen at scale. So I
yeah.
appreciate this example.
At this point, we've got all of the tools that we need to be able to do this. So we can check the status of the availability group on our endpoint, and we can move it around. The only other piece we do need to have configured is patch. So we're talking about patching of SQL availability group. Now, in this case, we won't go into any detail on patch. You want Jason for that. He is the patch man. We have got patch configured. We've got scans going on. We can see patches are applicable. And then we've got some patch lists configured. And we would tell you to do this dynamically. So looking at the age of patches when they were released, you might want to use some of the AEM logic here as well now. Effectively, we understand what patches are applicable to that device. You may wish to have maintenance windows set up, that kind of stuff as well. But the point is, patches set up, we've run a scan, and we could come in here and push some patches out. At that point, we don't need to go any further because everything else is done within Automate. Let's come into Automate now.
So one quick question on the patch list. I know usually when we create patch lists, we filter out SQL patches specifically.
Yeah.
And in this case, are we doing? It sounds like we would be doing both the OS patching and the SQL Server application patching at the same time. Is that right?
It's entirely up to you to be unhelpful and not give you an answer. So we would normally filter out things like SQL and probably Exchange and SharePoint patches simply because people tend to want to exercise a lot of control over how those applications are patched. I was an Exchange admin in a former life, and I didn't enjoy patching Exchange servers. It was a long and generally quite a sleepless night. You could deliver those patches with this if you wished. Whether it's appropriate or not is a call that you would need to make for your environment. There's nothing stopping you doing it, put it that way.
Here's the bucket of Legos.
I have got my playbook in here, and I've got a run that we'll go and look at afterwards because this wouldn't be a very exciting video if we sat here for a few hours and watched patch to SQL servers. But let's come in and edit you quickly. So I'm sure we've got into lots of detail around Automate already, but some of these options here can be really useful in this type of scenario. Because you think about patching SQL servers, it's the sort of thing that people have historically done manually. I know in my previous role, Patch Tuesday would come around a couple of weekends later. There'd be a team of people that would sit there and watch servers get patched, which is not very exciting, probably quite expensive, and everybody's got better things to be doing on a Saturday. If you put in notifications, which I haven't done here, to email you when things like we have errors, or maybe we've prompted for notification, or even better, we stopped prior to completion. This allows you to be automating the process, which is great because you take away some of the manual errors, but it also means you don't have to sit there and watch it. You can go and do something else, and it will tell you when stuff happens. If you've not worked with this, it's really easy to set up. You just go into Connect and you configure email profiles. So things like Office 365 is a kind of a next finished. Really trivial to set up, not hard at all.
And we actually have a Tanium Tech Talk on configuring O365 for Connect. Yeah,
Do we really?
we do.
I
Yeah.
am amazed.
Yeah, Shelly did it. It's been out there for a while. Yeah.
There you go. And this is a really good example of it because, what we're trying to do here is take manual work away. So put that in there, and you can see on your phone that it's happened or it needs your attention, and you can go and do something else. What we'll do is quickly walk through the steps. And again, this is where tailoring to your environment sits so well with Automate because you can stick other checks in here, other actions in here, that kind of thing. In my made up example, we have our two cluster nodes, SQL 1, SQL 2. SQL 1 is the normally primary node, so SQL 2 would normally be passive. In my patch schedule, what I have decided to do, and again, every environment's different, is I'm going to fail over the availability group to node 2. Then I'm going to check that node 1 really is secondary. Then I'm going to run the patch cycle on node 1. I'm going to wait 10 minutes after that finishes, let everything come back up, an example of what you can do. Then I'm going to check that node 1 is still secondary and it is healthy so that we're in a good state to be able to fail back. Then I'm going to use the failover or the switchover action again to move it back to node 1. Then I'm going to check that node 2 really is the secondary, so trust but verify. And then I'm going to run the patch cycle on node 2. And then I've finished. What I haven't done is put notifications or anything else in here, so loads of things we can do. And just to walk you through what this looks like. So this is the switch over to node 2. So we've got that SQL availability group switchover package that we looked at. In terms of the targeting, we're actually using, and hopefully you can see this, let's zoom in a bit. We're using the SQL availability group replica status sensor to check that. So what we're doing is saying, okay, well, we're going to fail over, we're going to target rather this at SQL 2. Remember I said the package, wherever you run it, is the machine that will be activated, so it'll be failed over to. What we're going to do here is saying, okay, the computer name must be SQL 2, and our status sensor must say that for the SQL availability group, the default instance on SQL 2, it must be secondary and it must be connected and it must be in a synchronized state, so we're healthy. Just to help you with some of this syntax, it's slightly awkward to see. You see where we've got the slash and the pipe. This is because we are wanting to examine that whole row of data that's come back. So it's a regex comparison. There's stuff on help about this, other examples that you'll find out there as well. And it basically means I can check all 4 parameters rather than just one of them, for example. So I can be very, very precise about it. And then how long do I want the steps to take? In this case, it's quite quick to fail over. If you've got much larger instances, maybe lots of databases, that kind of fun thing, you might need to increase this again, tailor it to your environment. How are we going to continue to the next step? So in this example, I'm quite prescriptive at every step about where things should be running. There are options where you could pass through targeting from one step to the next. I've not done that here. In this case, I'm just saying don't move forward unless all of the endpoints complete. Now, in this case, I'm only targeting one endpoint, so it's either everything or nothing. But again, just worth being aware of. Pretty straightforward though. So just to recap, we're using our switchover package to move the availability group to node 2. And we're checking that node 2 is healthy before we do it. So it's part of our targeting. It's saying it's got to be node 2 and it must be in a good state. If it's not, it just won't move forward and then we're stopped. So this would be something where having that email notification if we stop before the end would be really handy. So we'll just save that so we can go and have a look at the next one. So next one is really straightforward. So we've moved to node 2, and I'm sure you've been there as well, Ashley, where you move things and then you blink and they move back. So we actually want to make sure that it really has moved. And node 1, in this case, we're targeting node 1. The question criteria is exactly that same sensor again, but we're saying, is node 1 now secondary and healthy? So we failed over, but are we in a good state to continue? Because the last thing we want to do is move forward when things aren't good. We'd rather fix it before we go and cause more chaos. So that one's very, very straightforward. Again, we're saying we've got to be good. So all of the devices must meet the criteria before we proceed. The next step is installing patches. We've done Tech Talk videos on far more detail on doing patching with Automate, so I won't go into loads of detail with it. But if you're familiar with the patch module, just press this edit deployment button. This screen will look really familiar to you. It's all the standard configuration for deploying patches. Key things to point out, I've used my dynamic patch list. So this updates month by month. I don't have to update it. A few things that you might do differently with this type of deployment versus others is we are going to just restart when we're finished. We're not going to notify anybody. you might want to override maintenance windows because you may well be triggering this playbook to run manually, or it could be going on a schedule. So just you might treat patch slightly differently from normal. But when I was saying earlier, all you needed to have configured in patch were scans to have run and patch lists of some description created. You're then good to go. And we can see here the summary of what we're doing. Targeting is SQL 1, so that's our passive node now. And then off we go. This has been allowed an hour to run. Should be plenty for this device. Again, you might need to tailor this for your environment.
All right, so I
Um,
want to go
yeah,
back to that step for a second.
let's go back to
In
the
your
step.
condition, you said at the bottom, in the step duration. So we're just going to wait an hour,
Yeah,
and we're not going to check for anything, and we're just going to move on. So is that kind of like a blind next step? Is it
that one
possible?
is, yeah, you could configure that all. That's probably a better answer. It's just how I had it configured. Bearing in mind that when we get to the fifth step, we're going to make sure that we're healthy anyway.
Ah,
So we're
okay.
validating that we're in a good state before we go forward anyway. But just to go back to step 4, so this is a simple wait condition. Probably not actually needed in this scenario, but just an example that you might want to put it in there sometimes if you're starting services, perhaps. Yes, the service has started and the package has finished, but actually you've then got to wait 5 minutes for startup actions to complete that kind of stuff. So an example of what you can do there. So we can then come along, and this is what I was just saying. So we're using that same sensor again now, and we're just validating that the replica status again on SQL 1, which is the node we've just patched, is still healthy. And we'll just call out this quickly. I'm just going to zoom in, which hopefully doesn't break the console too much. So we've got this max age 60 parameter here. And when we were talking about the sensor, we were saying we've got the max age option there, and it's 15 minutes. Because we are working with the cluster and we're moving things around, we don't want the data or the results to be cached. We want to know exactly what the results are now and then use those to make our decision. And the max age parameter allows us to override that. So the max age 60 means basically make the max age 1 minute. So it's in seconds, 60 seconds. We wouldn't suggest you use this day in, day out. It's not a good practice with some sensors, depending on what they're doing. You could hurt your infrastructure a little bit. But in this scenario, it makes sense and it's something we need to do. We've left the regular sensor at 15 minutes rather than having that really low so that if people use it and interact, they're not inadvertently running the question over and over again on the endpoints. And then the final 3 steps are not very exciting because we've already done them once. We're going to fail over or switch over back to node 1. So we're going to make node 2 the passive node, and node 1 becomes the active node. So we can see the targeting is equal 1. We are going to save that, go on to our next step. We're then going to check the replica status again, making sure this time that node 2 is the secondary node. We can see secondary and it's synchronized, so it's healthy. And then finally, we're going to run the patch cycle on node 2. Zoom out a little bit so we can see that. So question criteria, node 2, or SQL 2 in this case. Very, very simple. If you think about the other steps that we've got here, the obvious ones for me would be deploying other actions. So you might need to stop and start some other services, perhaps on other devices entirely that rely on this cluster. Perhaps you've got an application that really does not like, even though the SQL backend is on a cluster, that brief blip when it flips it over will break it. So you could stop the service, wait a few minutes, etc., etc. You've got other common packages in here, so do things like manual reboots. Perhaps you need to do that. Yeah, we might not be doing patching at all. We might be just doing some maintenance that needs, okay, I need to go and change this and then reboot it and do all these other steps. And that would be another example of where coordinating things across different nodes with Automate works really well. User confirmation. So we sometimes get scenarios where we've got applications that simply, they're generally quite old, cannot be automated very easily. You know, it's all point and click interfaces. There's no command line for us to work with. So perhaps we do need to be on the device. We can use end user notifications to throw a prompt up and say, right, well, tell me when you're ready to proceed. So we can still use automate and patch to drive our patching, but we can allow an operator on the box to be notified when we are ready for them to press the button, stop the thing, move the widget, whatever's needed. And then Automate can continue on. So you still get the good quality patching. You're not relying on somebody to remember to do the next 10 steps in the right order, that kind of thing. Quite helpful. And we can throw in things like manual instructions, the verify conditions we used throughout, and then the wait we had in as well. So quite a nice example of the art of the possible, and hopefully would save people quite a lot of time.
Can we go back and look at the this last step install patches on Node 2? So
Yeah, of course.
I'm it's been a long time since I've looked at a cluster. Is that it? Just Node 2, you install the patches, then it just comes back up and syncs automatically back into the cluster? Or is there another command that we should run
In
at the
this
end?
in this case, yes, because it's because we patched Node 2, Node 1 first, which is the normally active node. Node 2 reboots, and all is well. Now, if I was a good admin, I'd have probably put another validation step in here. And if you think about that in conjunction with the events options, we could say run stops prior to completion if that last validation step doesn't show that node 2 is synchronized and the secondary again. So you can say, right, well, at the end, I should get an email telling me that either the run has completed successfully, excellent, job done, or we stopped prior to completion and I've been notified. Now, email is an easy one to set up. Automate does have API all around it as well. You can manage, run, check on playbooks, that kind of thing via the API very easily. So loads of different ways of handling that as well.
Yeah, I'd probably, for my own, I'd probably want a validation at the end
Yeah,
just to say, yeah, the service is back up on that node as well.
yeah. And
Yeah.
that's probably quite a nice thing from a change control perspective as well, that you can say, yep, I got the completion notification. I can close the change.
Yeah, and because I'm just an IT guy, I would probably, who's a little bit obsessive, it might not be a bad idea to just run that check on each member of the cluster as well, just at the very end, just to make sure
Yeah,
no other
final
weirdness
thing.
happened and everybody's healthy at the very end. Yeah.
You've had sleepless nights with clusters, haven't you? There's a healthy
uh,
dose of paranoia there.
yeah, I fight for the user. Yeah. So yeah, making sure everybody's covered. Yeah, but I had a couple other questions here. While this is automation at scale, it feels like there's something that's not scalable here. I really do have to code for each member of the cluster. I can't just say, "Hey, there's 5 nodes. Loop through these." I
Not
really
yet.
do have to, in today's version of Automate anyway, I have to put each step for each node, which is not a bad idea. Um, but I did just want to confirm that this is not really a template that I can just clone and change a computer name, and then all of a sudden I get the next cluster done. Right? There's a little
I
more
mean, you
to it.
certainly can clone it and just change the names, yes, and the
Okay.
targeting. So, but in terms of, I don't know, I can almost see you imagining a list at the top of endpoints and go cycle through these. Not yet. I know Stephen and the team behind Automate have got some fantastic plans and stuff coming over the course of this year. You will only see Automate grow in terms of its capability. Um,
Yeah,
so
that's a good point. I mean, stay tuned, folks. We're listening to your feedback, and we're hearing not only that it's working, but okay, yeah, it's working, but it should be nice if we had these other things, and
and I
that's
have these 10 things as well, please.
right. Can I have these other things? So we're working on those things, and it's going to be. I know we've got parameterized playbooks. I can't say a date necessarily. We've got a
Yeah,
gallery
that,
of.
that was what was going through my head, but I wasn't quite sure what we'd said publicly about that. But I can see how
Yeah,
parameterized playbooks would change this
yeah.
quite
So just stay
as you would
tuned.
describe.
Yeah. We can't give you any dates, but we know there's some big updates coming for Automate here. So just keep watching the show, and we'll keep you updated when those things post. So I guess back to my question then. So just to be clear for everyone, that for today, if I want to do multiple clusters, I'll need to kind of template this out and then clone it, change those parameters that you described, maybe
Yeah,
add another node or 2, just depending on
yeah,
the
whatever's needed
configuration.
to tailor it to your environment.
Okay.
But yes, you would you build it once and then clone it and then just change it to suit.
Hmm. So this is something that you cooked up in your lab.
Yep.
We should not test in production. And this is provided sample code in the article. When you go view this article over on the Resource Center, there is a login required because there's some code in there for you to use.
Yep.
So as far as kind of like next steps, then it would be for our customers. Then they would walk through the article, watch the video, kind of build out their own test, and then
Please.
yes, please.
I've had
And
those phone calls.
yeah, we don't want those phone calls. Yep. So, what else, as far as, have you got any like field experience with other customers who've tried this so far and in their labs and their production?
It was conversations with a few customers and prospects that kind of prompted me to go and put an option together as to how to do it. I had a call with a US customer about a month ago, actually, that was doing some Elastic Stack. If you're familiar with that one, patching with this. There's Elastic, if you don't know it, is a seam type product and log analysis tool that sits on Linux primarily. I think you can put it on other platforms to host it, but they were doing it on Linux. And they'd got sort of different roles because you've got front ends, you've got collectors, you've got analysis engines. They've all got different names that I can't remember. And they were using this in very similar ways. They've got simple packages, some of which are out the box for stopping and starting services. And it was just in case of stopping the service, patching it onto the next one, that kind of thing. Theirs was more complicated than this because there were more than two roles going on. So I think there were three or four, but it was simpler because you didn't actually have a cluster as such. You'd got a group of nodes that were all independent. So actually, for them, you could do multiple patch cycles so multiple endpoints patched at the same time. You didn't need to break them all up. So that I thought was quite a nice example. There was another customer, and I think we talked about this one on the Azure VM Extensions video, that saw using Azure VM Extensions to get Tanium Agent onto newly deployed devices and then automate to do stuff that they had previously scripted as a really good one. Nothing to do with clusters, but I thought that was quite a cool example as well. And then there's stuff on community that gets submitted all the time as well that customers are either saying, how can I, or I've done and I want to share, which is really cool to see. I've always liked that about IT, where the sort of cross-pollination and sharing of how people have fixed weird problems happens.
And that is a perfect segue to wrap this up, Rob. Thank you. And folks, as usual, we have a ton of resource links in the show notes below. Like Rob said, there's a walkthrough article. Rob is kind of our walkthrough king here on the show. He's done a number of fantastic walkthroughs that have gotten a lot of traction, and you voted with your clicks. So I hope that you'll be able to share this video with some of your peers as well. But also, like Rob just mentioned, if you go to help.tanium.com, that's a Tanium Resource Center. Up there in the corner, there's a jump to go to the Titans community, and the menu there, you'll see the Automate community. We've also got a link directly to that. Login is required, but that's where, again, like you saw today, this isn't just like an exact thing that you can import directly to your environment because it's going to be unique to your environment. But what you'll see over there are people talking about how they've structured their Automate playbooks, so you can share ideas like, hey, don't forget to add this check in there, that type of thing, right? What are the steps that you would put in your Automate playbook? So while it's kind of like a recipe that you can tweak for your own results. So go check out the Automate community over there at the Tanium Resource Center. Also, we've got docs and all the other links you would expect there in the show notes. So there you go. So now going back to our video game combo reference, the up, down, B, right shoulder button, all that stuff. You've got it here in Tanium Automate now to see how you can put those combo steps together to do complex tasks like cluster patching and so much more. So until next time, go Tanium.